Okay, which group is this?
Do we have a name of the group?
Oh, this
Berlin
is,
Dada.
well, the former Berlin Dada.
The former
Berlin Dada.
Yeah.
Former Berlin Dada.
To prioritize a subtractive logic as the dominant approach to architectural design will collapse the formal with the phenomenological, enhancing the spatial quality of architecture that is perpetually flattened by modern culture. The form emerges only as a result of a series of operations, emphasizing the action of the cut and the local over the global. There is no overall figure. We sculpt the ground and take from the ground what we use. We forget that for every additive logic comes first a subtractive move from the earth. Socially conceiving space from the inside out will recenter space making around a human. It will blur existing associations we may currently attach to underground spaces, placing sewers and tunnels on the same continuum as the sacred interiors of cathedrals. Technologically, it recalls the chiseling of the stonemason, the extension of which forms the very basis of current digital fabrication tools such as the CNC.
Our current paradigm of architecture stems from the primitive part, which builds on an additive logic of space making. This additive logic emphasizes the creation of space, whereas the subtractive logic would emphasize the discovery of space, likening the architect to an explorer. Furthermore, the divide between interior and exterior in contemporary architectural practice foregrounds architecture as a constructed object rather than a carved space, make it easily reduced to a single image or rendering and hence appropriated by mass media.
This present additive paradigm misses opportunities for deeper discovery and experience of three-dimensional space, beyond the simple assembling of objects and expression of them in two-dimensional renderings or photographs. A subtractive logic is inherently at odds with this reductive 2D practice and affords a greater appreciation of an occupant's spatial experience. Additionally, the opportunities for personal self-reflection represented by inward-turned subtracted space are missed in this current paradigm, which not only perpetuates society seeking distraction by aiding the mediaization of architecture, but also perpetuates it through a failure to provide introspective spaces where one can escape from such outside distractions. Furthermore, the opportunities for social gathering and community building presented by inward-turned subtracted space are missed by this current additive paradigm. Lastly, it is worth noting that our civilization does partake in subtractive processes in the procuring of resources such as steel, glass, oil, plastic, and other metals and minerals. However, our current paradigm considers these subtractive acts of drilling and mining to be outside the realm of architecture and dwelling. It simply treats these excavated spaces as vestigial and misses the opportunities they present to not only put us in touch with the resources that sustain us, but to reap all of the benefits cited previously.
The logic of a subtractive architecture has many precedents, both in man-made structures and the natural environment. Not only does it elevate the user experience within a built environment, for example, we don't think about the tectonics of a cave, only absorb its spatial qualities, but can potentially lead to different strategies of making. Take the Buddhist temples in Junta that are carved into the mountain. Rather than building from the bottom up, as is typically the case with contemporary building, they must carve from the top down to prevent the mass of the rocks from falling to death.
These Buddhist caves also exemplify some of the behavioral benefits afforded by dwelling in such a subtractive space. For example, while the process of carving into a cliff face was clearly more labor-intensive for the founding Buddhists of Ajanta, the monks chose such an inward-turned subtractive logic because it embodied their philosophy of self-reflection that they hoped to achieve through their lifestyle. Several historical analogies also exist to demonstrate the social and communal benefits afforded by inward-turned subtractive space. For example, the Greek amphitheaters that were carved into hillsides, or the Italian squares that were subtracted out of the dense urban fabric of early Rome, exemplify the potential for subtractive space to strengthen community ties. Lastly, Indian stepwells illustrate how inward-turned subtractive space can not only be used to bring a community closer together around a ritual of retrieving water, but also illustrates how the reappropriation of our civilization's current subtractive resource extraction processes might bring us together and put us in touch with that which sustains us. In addition to these historical architectural analogies, there are also many precedents of subtractive logic in the natural world that reinforce the social and communal benefits reaped from its application in the artificial. For example, many of the most tightly knit communities of organisms in the animal kingdom dwell within structures built of subtractive logic. Termites, ants, wasps, and prairie dogs are all examples of animal communities dwelling within elaborate burrows derived from subtractive logic, which define the community and tie it together. Interestingly, this mode of subtractive dwelling also lends itself to a greater community resiliency in the face of hardship. For example, it was largely through these types of burrows and community ties that mammals and arthropods thrived through the extinction of the dinosaurs about 1 million years ago. Our target is the occupant, the human who interacts with and exists within architectural space. By this we mean not only the egalitarian base of all building users as a revolutionary force to demand a new focus on the space that surrounds them, but also the architects themselves who, in a subtractive paradigm, should assume a role as the occupant, the explorer, and the discoverer of their space. This is in opposition to naming the architect as target, which has the potential to perpetuate a paradigm of designers simply stating what a space should be from an omnipotent additive viewpoint, as an oppressive dictator of form. By targeting the occupants and fostering an empathy towards them, architecture will be reconceived from the user's point of view, leading to a methodology that begins with the user and carves outward into space. The architectural practice of focusing on the occupant should also induce a habit of self-reflection in the architect and ensure continual questioning of how he or she would feel in the space they carve. In subtractive space, this subtractive space developed with subtractive logics, building users should also find themselves participating in this practice of empathizing with each other and reflecting upon themselves. In such subtractive space, both architects and users exist within the same egalitarian boundaries, for which there is no immediate escape to an exterior, infinite, or unbounded space where he or she could pretend to be above their fellow occupants. As such, a focus on the occupants should bring a new architectural democracy which strengthened empathy between all people and deeper interpersonal relationships.
In her book, Plato's Hystra, the philosopher and theorist Luce Irigaray challenges the very foundations of Western cultural conception. She shows that Plato's allegory of the cave, far from being a moment of purity in which humanity struggles for truth, was already laden with specific cultural codings. In cementing the primacy of sight within Western cultural hierarchy, Plato set into motion the development of a society that has neither the words nor the ability to imagine a reality beyond the visual. Situated within the postmodern digital age, Irigaray suggests a return to this beginning to probe the potentials of a society where different values and self-identity had taken hold. Likewise, to Plato's cave, we set up Loge's hut. Imagine, if you will, that all the branches of architectural development can be traced back to this primitive hut. Fashioned from the debris of nature into a form amenable to man's needs and desires, this initial act married the conception of architecture to the logic of addition. Fastening, affixing, stacking, assembling. Even the vocabulary of architecture is spoken of in the additive. Society is built up. However, what if we were to return to the primitive moment and imagine an alternative? What if nature had denied us the fallen branch, providing nothing more than the ground underfoot, the human hand, and the architectural desire? If the ape man had dug into the surface for shelter rather than erected a hut upon it, where would we be? We here today announce a society in which architectural logic unleashes the terms subtraction and excavation, where the first creative act is the emptying of the mind, starting with the process of unlearning, undoing, unmaking. Imagine a society in which form and phenomena have imploded into a singularity, a society where the architect-artist is no longer the builder of form, but the sculptor of space.
Love it. So that, I mean, it's changed very nicely since the last you sent it. I thought just taking it more seriously and found the theories. I find it hugely suggestive. It's strangely, just anecdotally, the White House just asked MIT to think about the future of manufacturing. And I went along to one of the meetings, and what the buzzword is at the moment is additive manufacturing. And this whole bunch of about 50 MIT professors were all crowded in this room until after about half an hour, 45 minutes, someone raised their hand and tentatively said, what is additive manufacturing? And the guy running the show, who's now the provost, Marty Schmidt, he said he thought about it a bit, and he said, I think it probably means it's not subtractive. Anyway, the latest trend is to sort of put material in space without destroying other materials somehow. So 3D print logic is seen as somehow the nirvana of the next. But I love this. I find this so suggestive. I mean, if you went after this as a thesis, somebody, just a purely subtractive sort of creative process would be subtractive, the emptying of your mind, and all the way through the actual manufacturing process using CNC kind of routing, back to the origins of caves. It could be extraordinary. What do you think of GA's project at the house? Yeah. The underground. I mean, maybe show that next week. That's beautiful. I'll pick on a few of you to bring forward the project.
So what I like this too, and I think again what I'm picking up on, or what I'm able to respond to is again I'm seeing a thrust, I'm seeing a vector, certain trajectory. It's away from a given or a convention and towards another possibility. It's within an archetypal frame. It's very interesting where this is headed, and I guess a framing context for me, a comment would be I'm seeing a kind of maybe a thesis prep MIT vanguard emerging here. If we take these projects, these three we've seen so far, and syncretize them, I think we've got a pretty powerful movement that if we fleshed it out, give it more than 1 week to develop, it could be pretty potent, pretty suggestive. But the archetype that I'm seeing here, the idea is that in terms of the sort of an archetypal, in the best sense, as meaning what are the possibilities of the world that we have, and what have been developed historically. Western civilization, the one we're moving and wanting to push away from as our contrast right now, has been that of separateness, moving out to the individual, the sort of heroic model, the climbing of the mountain, the putting forward of the individual agent, sort of the Ayn Rand vision of, Atlas Shrugged or something like that. And I think but the other archetypal movement that you're referring to, especially in the way the images supported the argument or the thesis, is towards a movement of contraction. So, we know the rhythm of the world, the breath of the world, the reason why psyche or soul or breath, shi in Chinese is sort of the image of life, is that there's a rhythm of expanding and contracting. And the heroic model expands, but expands to the point of say what someone like Baudrillard would say would be fatal excess. I mean, it never stops. It doesn't find a limit. There's a moment where the world has to turn back, and the turning back is towards merging. It's the mystical impetus of the sacred that where many of your images were related to, which is actually the cave at its best. It's an Orphic cave, right? So, it's the idea of returning, contracting, moving inward, becoming passive, and not asserting oneself, but removing, subtracting the self. Has a long sacred history and a very powerful reward for doing so. And maybe this is a pretty good model. I think it's well supported within contemporary theory, and it's a pretty good model for what might have to be a survival strategy, because that's what we're talking about, is the idea of the inner, the womb-like, the secure, the closing out, which isn't a selfishness, it's precisely emerging and a giving up of self to integrate. And this might be the condition of a population that's moving towards 8 billion, 9 billion people coming later in the century, that there can't be a sense of everybody being an individual little selfish one, but there has to be this integrative movement, which is contraction security, but in the sense of merging, not a sense of becoming selfish. So that's sort of the thrust that I see here towards this subtractive move. That the archetypal imagery is of the underground and the cave and the womb and so forth is that of merger, even mystical in its experience.
Yeah, hugely suggestive. Amazing. And again, it's sort of born of a kind of crazy little thing, and then you start thinking about it, and there's actually great substance there, culturally, tectonically, in many ways. Just the tectonics. I mean, when you think you're going back to ancient archetypes that were subtracted, and we've sort of forgotten them in preference for the additive tectonics
Right.
and the jointing of everything. And architecture is the framing and the jointing. Boy, do we need a new paradigm, because it seems an incredibly, not only wasteful one, but that's just a frustratingly banal one when we've got technologies that can do it otherwise. I find, yeah, delicious, all of it. Love it. But what resonates with me is that it brings you to a point that within a disciplinary, because everything you're referring to is within the kind of deep knowledge of architecture, and you're interrogating it anew. So you're not sort of going off and doing some mega kind of opus magnum. You're actually interrogating the interiors then. In what could be a very kind of quiet and serene way, and yet it's deep, and it would offer a great prospect of learning. And you've only followed this through. You've only followed it through for a few days, 2 days.
But I think that's a good point, Mark. That when we're thinking about the productivity of this, are you still hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When you hear about the productivity, I mean, think about the productivity. How briefly, the thesis prep has addressed these things, but the idea that what the CATTt does, like I was just saying, so by pushing away from the contrast, pushing away that the potentiality of signification and finding this other, this underground and this subtractive, it positions you within an archetype. I mean that there's a potentiality there. If you look around and say, whoa, actually this is pretty suggestive. This could actually be something, and I think that's part of the generosity of the method. It gives. It sort of gives more than you might expect just by making certain moves. We all know that on creativity it says take that thing and turn it 1/4 turn, and it's suggestive. It's just like a prompt. But the other thing I'd say, a point of transition that I see, joining these projects, just to say what you had said earlier about the body moving out to the senses. All of us are saying, really think about the sensorium. Think about the kinds of experiences that are neglected, the kinds of possible body experiences that are neglected. And if you do connect infrastructure with the body in that way, and let's say if we went through a period, really the whole period of literacy, in which idea became proper, and like you mentioned, Irigaray, I mean, and Heidegger would agree. I mean that what happens with Plato is the idea, meaning the visual look of appearance, comes to dominate thought. And logic and reason, and that we're moving into a period which no longer relies upon vision in that way, and it's sort of hard for us to imagine an image-based imaging world that is not actually based on sight; it's based on something else. And what I liked in this project, especially starting with the image of the sewer, is that we might think about the body writ large. I mean, this is the microcosm, macrocosm. There's the image of the modular flashed by in an earlier project. And we still have to ask that question. I mean, that was what earlier projects were saying: separate infrastructure from dwelling. I mean, the sense that we have to address the fact that why is there a program? It's because we have bodies, so there has to be a sewer. But the sewer is connected not with the eye; it's connected with a different organ system. And say if we have a Kantian idea of the part object, we're understanding that all the separable parts of the human body are out circulating in the world, and that our institutions and our infrastructure is the body writ large. So for example, the anal demand situation, the breast is a part object, the anus and shit is a part object. And so is hearing is a part object, sight is a part. Those are the objets in Lacan. But and our institutions are organized around them. So what if we said, well, instead of the organ of the eye, what if we had the organ of nutrition? This is just as important. The whole nutrition system, including consuming and shitting and eliminating. That's just as important. The subtractive logic is you have to get things out of your body, but then put them in. There's a circulation process. Why not have a theoretical? Why not have an organized mode of thought that doesn't just switch from vision to nutrition, but that understands that that when we're building, we're actually building we're institutionalizing the capabilities and capacities and necessities of the body. And this, with the sewer, just as important as the look of the facade. So that occurs to me as being a way to generalize among these projects and think about the larger sensorium shift as a practical matter.
The creative process could be the enema.
That's right.
That's right, like
On the note. Next one. That was great. That was really great. You have to, of course, since it was your idea that architecture is permanent competition, of course you have to give awards at the end of it.